Welcome to the HR Chat Show, one of the world's most downloaded and shared podcasts designed for HR pros, talent execs, tech enthusiasts, and business leaders. For hundreds more episodes and what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.
Hello, I'm Pauline James, CEO of Anchor HR, and I'm thrilled to be partnering with the notable David Creelman, CEO of Creelman Research, and the renowned HR Chat podcast on a series to help HR pros, talent execs, tech enthusiasts, and business leaders navigate AI's impact on organizations, jobs, and people. With the rise of AI and its profound impact on HR, this series seeks to assist our community in being both thoughtful and proactive. In this episode, we explore the ethical and governance considerations when implementing artificial intelligence in organizations. Join us as we speak with three distinguished experts to discuss the practical challenges and key considerations of AI integration in the workplace. Let's start by talking to Frank Rudzicz. Frank is an accomplished researcher and expert in the field of AI and holds numerous related roles, including associate professor at Dalhousie University, co-founder of Winterlight Labs Incorporated, and founding faculty member of the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence. His work is in machine learning and healthcare, especially in natural language processing, speech recognition, and safe AI. His work has been featured in major media and scientific publications. Frank, really pleased to have you with us here today and to hear your insights. Beyond our short introduction, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
My research focus has really been about focusing on how to transfer AI into the real world in areas that make a lot of social benefit, and my focus has been mostly on healthcare as a result.
Frank, as we do move it into the real world of organizations, what are some of the ethical considerations leaders have to have as it becomes commonplace?
There is probably not enough time to go into all of them, but to me, the most important ethical considerations about AI being transferred into practice have to do with bias and generalizability. How well does a model trained on a certain amount of data generalize to different domains? And that includes demographic bias. Privacy remains a big concern. This is coming up a lot in the public consciousness when large organizations are basically just gathering data online, and that data is provided by us sort of free of charge through our interactions with websites. And not only our uploads, but the creative works of artists and writers is also being gobbled up by this massive models. So who owns the data? How much of your own personal data is now under the control of these organizations? So privacy is the second big category. And to me, the third big category, which is not often discussed, has to do with interpretability and explainability and sort of the scientific process. There's a lot you can do now with machine learning and AI that is almost completely automatic. There's a lot less of a requirement of domain expertise in training these things now, which means that you can get really good performance, but not really understand how these massive models work, which means that maybe you're ignoring or unable to see problems of bias like we discussed earlier. What is the model actually learning? How is it actually coming into its decisions? So to me, related issue to the first two is explainability. Can we have methods that can dig into the black box of modern neural networks and understand how they actually work?
And let me ask a little bit about privacy, where within an organization, the employee is working for you. Right now, it's becoming popular to all kinds of monitoring. And so there's all the emails and which sites they go on to, how often, how fast they're clicking keystrokes. Amazon's famous for tracking people as they're moving around the warehouse and if they're going to the washroom, if they're sitting down, all those kinds of things. From a employer-employee point of view, to what extent does the employer have a right to know everything about what their employees are doing? And to what extent is it a privacy violation to be tracking their keystrokes?
I'm not a lawyer, so technically I can't answer this question like in all jurisdictions. My understanding is that in a lot of cases, this is sort of the rights of the employer determined by a bilateral agreement. So, when an employee becomes an employee of a company, they agree to certain conditions in the contract. And if the contract includes language about monitoring keystrokes, then it becomes legal to do so. That's sort of the letter of the law. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but sometimes there's a lot of variability. Different companies have different approaches, and indeed different jurisdictions have different constraints as to what a company can do. But then there's sort of the spirit of the law. Certainly we have these the right to do something, but that doesn't mean we need to do something. And that also doesn't mean that it's in the best interests of the company to monitor everything that their employees are doing, because I'm not a sociologist either, but most of the time my understanding is people don't like, constantly having a camera, so to speak, over their shoulder, examining everything they do. Having the ability to take a break once in a while is not only good for the mental health of the individual employee, but a happy employee is more productive and is in the better interests of the overall company. So from the top to the bottom, I understand the idea that we want to understand what our employees are doing. We want to be able to measure performance and reward good performance. But there's probably an area, in my opinion, with some kind of barrier where we want the employees to feel that they can be themselves and have some measure of privacy.
Yes, and I think that HR professionals will really relate to the idea of there is a legal side and then there's a psychological side, and the importance of having a agreed upon psychological contract so that irrespective of whatever the law says, both employee and employer understand and agree with how things are being done.
We talk about the risks and where AI may cause issues. Is the converse also a consideration? Are there ways that AI could help us, in fact, be more ethical, more objective, for example?
I think that's great. I think there's lots of ways in which AI can help us be more objective and lead to increased safety and efficiency that's really beneficial to people more generally. So I can speak a little bit specifically about like my main domain in healthcare. There's a ton of different use cases or applications in which we might see AI becoming sort of the standard of care in the not too distant future. Some of them are much more risky or in more high risk situations, and some of them involve a lot more access to patient data, and then therefore questions of privacy are much more important. And we're still at the early phase of sort of integration of AI into practice. When computer scientists, technologists, users are working with organizations to deploy it, sometimes, rightfully so, there's lots of questions about, again, privacy bias, accuracy, unforeseen risks. And it's also a problem, it's also a risk to do nothing, right? So if in that whole spectrum of tasks, some of them are very low risk, some of them don't involve very much access to patient or employee information, and not implementing those just because other applications are risky is a failure. It's an invisible risk to just do the status quo, but as we see across various healthcare implementations, those we are currently, if we don't do something different, that's a huge problem. Yeah, I think on one hand, not using AI is also risky, and it can lead to continued problems of physician burnout, safety problems for patients, efficiency problems that cost healthcare systems. So again, it's ethical of us to try to do everything we can to actually deploy these technologies where we can. And starting in low risk situations is the best place to do that. You also asked about how we can be more ethical. Now, this is also a big question. I want to touch on this very briefly. The way people interact with very popular online chat networks currently is very impressive. The technology is very impressive, but I think most of us are familiar with problems related to hallucination of facts. So these AIs are designed mostly to mimic human behavior and match human expectations. So if you ask it a question, it gives you an answer, and it does so in a way that sounds human. But sometimes cite references that just don't exist. They'll give you websites to check for sources that just don't exist because it's just synthesizing characters and words from its internal structure, and there's no actual explicit knowledge base in existence. So that's the problem for us kind of behaving or us interacting with facts. But there are a lot of other smaller research projects that are trying to integrate that kind of technology with explicit knowledge bases. So whenever you ask these chat programs a question, it's only able to give you sources that actually exist and actually highlight sections of those sources where it found its answers. I think currently it's a bit of the Wild West, but going forward, we'll have a much deeper access to factual information.
Similarly, I wonder if you could comment on how you see it potentially evolving to help us reduce bias. At present, there's obvious and important concerns around what database it's using, the reference, that there's inherent bias in the data that's being referenced, but whether in the short, mid, long term, AI could actually assist us.
I think I've actually been pretty impressed with, some of the popular online chat programs in terms of how it interacts with demographic bias. It's not clear how they did this because the company, despite its name, has been very closed with regards to its internal methods. But it's very clear that they work with human raters who identify, sexist, racist, ageist, ableist, and so on, sort of rhetoric, and kind of defaults into a sorry, I can't help you sort of response, like a kind of a canned response. And there's a community of people out there who are trying to break that bias mitigation scheme. And fortunately, they seem to be having a pretty hard time of it, which is very encouraging. And for all of the individuals who are trying to automate the recognition of hateful speech behind the scenes, it's very encouraging. At the same time, I personally have a bit of a worry, again, that you'll have very powerful individuals, organizations, maybe countries that may decide that being biased towards a particular political point of view, maybe a particular country, maybe competing companies, that kind of bias would be perfectly acceptable. And I doubt very much that those organizations would limit themselves without some kind of oversight. Even though it seems today that ChatGPT is very avoidant of certain kind of rhetoric, I'm worried about how this could evolve in the future if, certain groups get control of the technology.
Thank you. I'd also like to ask about empathy. And there's a common perception that humans are better at empathy. And I'd welcome your perspective on whether AI could help us be more empathetic.
Yeah, this is kind of the perennial question. And this sort of was one of the arguments that we received back when I was an undergrad about AI. AI is never achievable because it'll never have emotions, and emotions are so central to the human experience. But there's kind of two answers to this question. The first answer is that, well, AI already can recognize emotions with an alarming accuracy and precision. In my own research, for example, we use networks that analyze the voice or analyze facial features to detect somebody's mood, someone's sentiment, and even sometimes diagnose them as having a range of conditions like depression, anxiety, even dementia. And these are very human conditions. These are very much about what's going on in the minds of the people being recorded. But in a lot of these scenarios, AI has been shown to be much more accurate than humans, even expert humans, in detecting, and categorizing people along these lines. And it does so in ways that AI avoids human biases. It identifies very subtle aspects of the data that might be too subtle for our own perceptions to really catch up on. So therefore, AI is more accurate than us at recognizing happiness, sadness, anxiety, and so on. And there's a lot of evidence of that already. I'm not worried about AI understanding emotion in us. The other side of the equation is, does AI have empathy itself? And that is a question that currently is, well, no, it doesn't. It's of silicon and weights and large matrices on large computers. On one hand, not to sound too sci-fi, but what are we? I mean, we're nothing much more than neurotransmitters and neurons. So if we can do it with carbon-based cells, why can't machines learn empathy with silicon? But on the other hand, it's not so much about whether or not we have empathy, or machines have empathy, but whether or not they can respond in a way that mimics empathy. So if a person interacting with a personal chatbot is indicating that they had a very rough day and something very bad happened to them at work or at school, already, like I mentioned before, AI can detect that very accurately. And there's a lot of research in human-computer interaction that yet has to be done, how to respond most effectively to help the person avoid self-harm, maybe seek treatment or seek help. But we're working on it. I mean, we and others are working on that very problem. And I also don't doubt that in the not-too-distant future, our chatbots will respond in a way that is probably more comforting, more precise, and takes more time than humans we can often give to people in those situations. I think eventually we'll have robot psychologists that are more empathetic than human ones.
Yeah, I find it interesting. We think about individuals in public-facing professions, how much time we spend training them to overcome defensiveness and bias and sometimes ego, where we don't have the same challenge, I believe, with machine learning. And is the risk, conversely, people would rather chat with their AI manager, their AI friend, than those we would prefer they interact with.
Yeah. In some sense, this is actually like an old benefit that predates modern neural networks. But often when someone is struggling internally and they want to tell somebody, they can't tell their parents, their children, their spouse, or whatever, or their friends or their coworkers, because they just feel like they're going to be judged, that this expression is going to be added to this really complicated other human relationship. But understanding that the machine doesn't have judgments in the same way that other humans might, it really helps people open up a little bit, which has kind of led to a vast anthropomorphizing of our technology.
Now, we've talked about the ethical risks and also some of the opportunities that come with AI. If you're a leader in the organization responsible for overseeing this, how do you provide governance over the introduction of these new technologies?
That's a really good question. Governance of AI is something that a lot of organizations are looking into, and they're trying to sort of formalize these processes. The IEEE in particular has a subcommittee that's designed on how organizations that have an engineering wing, I think it generalizes, can apply strict methods of governance to their practices. That's still in development. The ISO is also developing standards for governance within organizations of AI that employers or leaders within organizations can follow. So I kind of recommend people to look to the subcommittees on AI at the IEEE and the ISO. That being said, I think it's always good advice for people to try to become more educated in the technologies, especially with AI. There's a lot of buzzwords. I'm using some of them myself today, some high-level concepts that I think a lot of people are becoming more aware of when it comes to the technologies. It's fundamentally a scientific endeavor, and there's a lot of detail on how these networks are trained and how they're used and how their internal structures are set up. We don't all have to become elite programmers or hackers to be leaders in our organizations, but it still helps to just learn as much as we possibly can about what's going on. And to do that, often you need to hire people who are very skilled, people who have gone through master's programs, maybe applied master's programs in AI in multidisciplinary contexts, like in fintech or healthcare or whatever the case may be. So you get an internal team of a few people to help decision makers in the organization perform governance. I think the only other piece of advice I would give is that it's not always necessary to follow the state of the art or the current trend. AI is changing very rapidly, and every few months, these massive new breakthroughs in the technologies are occurring. And then these breakthroughs trickle their way through the media and people's consciousness, and can be desirable for a company to demonstrate that it's at the state of the art and it's using these new technologies. But a lot of these new technologies haven't really been fully tested yet and evaluated. So while it's important to keep up to speed and have your internal AI team sort of maybe even evaluating some of these technologies, my advice is usually it's okay to look back 2 or 3 years, try to implement technologies that are a bit more tested.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the HR Chat podcast. If you're enjoying this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. And now, back to the conversation.
Dr. Rudzicz spoke about the ethical side of AI, both the good and the bad. As we delve into the topic of governance, we thought it would be helpful to speak to an employment lawyer. Kate Bischoff is the founder of Thrive Law and Consulting. She is a renowned expert in employment law and HR and has a background that includes roles at the Consulate General in Jerusalem and the U.S. Embassy in Lusaka, Zambia. Kate is a go-to authority recognized by the New York Times, CNN, and more. She's also co-host of the Hostile Work Environment podcast. Kate brings a wealth of knowledge on workplace innovation and compliance. Kate, so pleased to have you with us today. Beyond our introduction, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm an employment attorney and HR consultant. I get to spend my time in small businesses, generally under 3,000 employees, fixing policies, doing trainings, and figuring out what's going on.
Thank you. Really welcome your perspective with the advent and advances in AI lately, and to hear your perspective on the legal risks that you see AI poses for HR in the US and beyond.
Okay, well, there's not a shortage of potential legal issues related to AI. Whether it is discrimination that could come inadvertently or intentionally, or whether there's privacy or data privacy issues, like how we use those data. There are lots of different concerns out there about AI, even though it has so many promises.
Do you want to tell us about some of the issues you've seen in terms of recruiting? Because I know that's a top concern.
So we've actually gotten our first consent decree from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission on a selection tool that weeded out candidates. And this is a relatively small organization that had an algorithm that weeded out women over the age of 55 and men over the age of 60. It was just an automatic, just weeded those people out. And the consent decree did not deal specifically with the algorithm. It dealt with the decision makers needing a new policy, needing to educate managers that you can't discriminate on the basis of gender and age is how the consent decree reads. It didn't actually deal with the algorithm, but that's coming. And so when we think about where the US law is going to be and where, particularly where the EEOC is going to be, it's going to be looking at the discrimination that is intentional or unintentional in the algorithms itself.
And I'm just curious, in this case, was it intentional?
Well, we don't get an admission in the consent decree. We get a what direction you're going to take consent decree. So it's not clear that it was intentional. The legal theory behind it was that it was an intentional discrimination. It was a disparate treatment, not a disparate impact kind of analysis. And those analyses are different. The treatment is you're discriminating against me because of my age and gender, where impact is you've got a system that inadvertently results in the discrimination of me. And so this was an intentional legal theory used, but it's not clear that the algorithm itself was intending to do this.
And what about, I know that Workday has had issues as well. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Well, in the Workday situation, we've got disability and race as the bases of discrimination. And one in particular gentleman applied to, I think, between 80 and 100 different jobs and through the Workday system and was pushed out or rejected every time. And so his theory is that because he has a disability and because he's Black, he's being discriminated against. This is still in the very early stages. We don't have a whole lot of information about this particular case, but the same theory exists. Now, in Workdays, theoretically, I genuinely believe that their algorithm is going to be much more advanced in the iTutors case. But the algorithm, they're going to have to explain it. And that is a particular challenge for a lot of technology companies is because as their algorithms use machine learning and get more data and change factors, you have to explain how the algorithm was working at the time of this particular applicant. And so there's a whole bunch of, is the algorithm explainable? Can we go back to that particular date? Do we even have the information that we used on that particular date? There's a lot of legalistic discovery issues that are going to be in play here in this one, but this is going to be a regular challenge that artificial intelligence organizations have.
Yeah, and I just have to say that I think this is going to be a very difficult thing for HR to deal with because HR will say, well, we don't know how the algorithm is working. They ask IT and IT will say, actually, we don't know either.
Yes, that is exactly the problem. The employer is always the one who is responsible for the decision-making and who to hire. If they have a tool that helps them weed out candidates to get there, they might have tried to shift some of that blame to the tool, but there is no great mechanism to hold the tool accountable for what the tool does, with the exception of just a couple of states. Now, there's no US national law that would say the tool is ultimately responsible. And in most agreements with when you hire a vendor, they say, no, you have to indemnify me and we're not responsible for how you use it. But I think HR forgets that we are the ultimate ones responsible, not the multiple things that we use, whether we're using an outside recruiter or we're using a tool that helps us source and recruit folks. We think, oh, well, everybody will be in the blame game. No, it's going to be us, solely us, every time.
Kate, would really welcome your thoughts and perspective on how HR should be moving forward with diligence as they are looking to embed AI tools and systems and analysis into their day-to-day operations.
Well, one thing that AI promises is that it's going to make things easier. And when I hear that it's going to make things easier, like you're going to find the perfect candidate really easy, you're going to find all the holes in performance really easy. What I hear is that we're going to get complacent and or lazy because we're farming out some of those decision-making to a vendor, to a tool that we're using. And I want to make sure that HR understands that it is always the organization's responsibility whenever we make an employment decision, period, and stop. Remember back in the time where you get 5-star ratings for what shows you wanted to watch on Netflix and you could just mindlessly go through the list and I like all these shows. The same could happen with hiring managers and recruiting teams when they're looking at who the best candidates are. Well, we'll just go by all the 5-star ratings that the tool is giving us. Let's just lazily do that. That is the problem, is we cannot rely on the tools to make the decisions. We have the responsibility to make those decisions and have the liability that comes with those decisions. We cannot farm this out to a vendor. We cannot farm it out to a tool. We remain the ultimate liability. To avoid that complacency and avoid that laziness, we have to talk about it. We have to talk about what it means to avoid discrimination. Do we see a whole bunch of white male candidates being spit out to us by the tool? Do we see only women being selected for this particular job by the tool? We need to ask questions, push back on the tool to get more information to make sure that we are being responsible for making non-discriminatory decisions.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on how HR can manage the risks that are posed with this advance in technology, while at the same time helping the organization take advantage of the benefits of the tech as well?
Well, there are lots and lots of benefits, as every HR vendor would tell you. We're the best. It's all going to be great. What I would like to see HR do is both seize the benefits while holding tools' feet to the fire. Like, how are you using an adversarial system to make sure that there's no discrimination in here? How do you know that the data is safe? How do you know that I'm not inadvertently giving you data that then I could be held liable because there's now a breach in that data? So asking the difficult questions. Vendors should be prepared to answer those difficult questions, and not just by the salesperson. HR needs to have access to the IT people, needs to have access to the developers, needs to have access to a variety of different people to make sure their questions are answered satisfactorily before launching this tool. There is a difference between being bleeding edge and cutting edge. I would really like my clients to be cutting edge on this and seize the opportunities of the tool, but the bleeding edge is just going to get the attention of the EEOC and other agencies that are going to come down the pike and say, how did you know you weren't discriminating? Because we see evidence you were.
No, I was going to ask you about generative AI. So these initial problems were with basically machine learning tools that were looking at data and then making a prediction, for example, who would be a good candidate. Generative AI has a whole set of new capabilities. Any thoughts about the legal issues that might bring up for HR?
We have to know what data it's eating so that we know we can rely upon its output, because if the data was good first, the output is going to be good too. Garbage in, garbage out. It's general thing that we've known for decades. But when you're using a generative AI, I want HR teams to be going, are you eating the internet? Because the internet's not good for anybody. Or how are you developing this? How are you keeping away the bad stuff that might exist? And how do you quality check it? Those are the kinds of questions I think we need to be asking about generative AI early in the process.
Yeah, and I would just comment that given how little we know about what it's eaten, the data that's gone into it, that may lead you to say, well, we can use it if we just want to get some ideas on a communication letter. If it's informing decision-making or legal advice, anything like that, then we better just not use the tool for that.
I think it's an interesting tool for research in lots of different ways, but trust but verify. Like, I want to know that what is being spit out. And again, this comes back to complacency and laziness. Like, you're going to have to verify a lot of these things. Yes, it's going to make things easier theoretically, but you can't simply go, oh, it's going to write this termination letter. It's going to have all the COBRA information in it. It's all going to be fine. You have to look at it before you send it out.
That's excellent advice.
Kate, just wondering if there's any further advice you would have for HR leaders, or what you would like them to be thinking about over the next short cycle as this technology becomes more prevalent.
My biggest concern about AI is the potential for perpetuating discrimination that we already see in workplaces. When you're trying to find the perfect candidate, it looks at all of your performance data in the past. And so you're going to get what you've had in the past for that very reason. So my biggest piece of advice is, remember, humans need to be integrated into these decisions. This is just a tool in your toolkit. We have to stay active and really in control of the decision making. And when you see the complacency happening, we have to step in right away because it's a significant risk to the org.
Kate, with the advent and advances in this new technology, how do you see the role of HR evolving, or how do you believe it needs to evolve?
I believe it needs to evolve to understand how the technology works and then ask really difficult questions. Not only because our role is going to change with the use of these tools, but the importance of managing, auditing, researching how the tools work is going to become critically important as that risk changes, as that risk gets bigger, as it gets more important, as we use more and more of these tools. We cannot, in human resources, enjoy just pushing paper anymore. The tools are going to help do a lot of that stuff for us, but we're going to have to check it, we're going to have to manage it, and we're going to have to hold the tools' feet to the fire to get through the risks that they could create for us as well.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the HR Chat Show. IEA training provides professional development to a changing workforce with changing needs. And we're proud to support this episode of the HR Chat podcast. IEA offers lots of courses, webinars, and on-demand training to meet our students where they are and help them reach their goals. We're proud of our contribution to better risk analysis and high operating standards in the industry. Learn more at ieatraining.org. And now, back to the conversation.
We're going to finish off this discussion of governance by talking to someone directly involved with AI governance at a large corporation. Jesslyn Dymond is the Director of Data Ethics at TELUS, leading the approach to responsible data-driven innovation, drawing on a background of privacy and information management expertise. She's part of TELUS's Data and Trust Office, a team devoted to ensuring the data handling practices are responsible and respectful. Jesslyn has completed a Master of Information from the University of Toronto's iSchool and is recognized for her leadership in data enablement and as an advocate for creative solutions to build customer trust with emerging technology. Jesslyn, beyond our short introduction, could you take a minute to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Jesslyn Dymond, and I am the Director of Data Ethics at TELUS. That means I'm part of a team called our Data and Trust Office. And what the Data and Trust Office, or DTO at TELUS does, is it helps our business and technology teams build out sustainable data strategies to help build out new products, services, platforms in a way that's consistent with our trust model. So ensuring that when we build out things that involve data and AI, we're using data in a way that generates value, promotes respect, and builds security. And so within my role in our data ethics team, I lead our responsible AI program, which a lot of people want to talk about these days. And I also lead our data for good portfolio. We're using data in ways that helps build out social good and enable remarkable human outcomes.
Thank you. Really helpful background as we support our audience in understanding how to introduce and navigate their teams in leveraging AI in a responsible, thoughtful way. Jesslyn, what is your advice for those beginning to explore, beginning to pilot, and leverage AI within their organizations?
Well, when one is starting to look at AI, there's a lot to be thinking about, and there's so much amazing possibility that this technology brings. And I think it is something we want to embrace and really learn from. And so piloting the technology in the safest way possible is so important. So thinking about really low risk use cases that may not involve sensitive information or that are really more experimental to kind of see what it can do and learn about how it works. And I think that's important for all of us. Our AI accelerator team at TELUS, which I work very closely with, put it really nicely when we were talking about the types of training and learning we all need to be doing to support the use of AI. So we've been working on data literacy for some time at TELUS. And when you're looking at AI, I think there's a new level of data literacy we need to be thinking about, which is AI literacy. And so if we're learning about how to use generative AI, for example, we've heard that term prompt engineering come up, learning how to actually ask great questions to the tool so that you get useful output. And the question was, are we going to hire a bunch of prompt engineers? No, I think we all need to learn how to become prompt engineers. And so learning what's possible with the tool is so important for helping understand both the benefits it brings, but the risks, the challenges, and the areas that may require a different type of governance.
Thank you. Jesslyn, how do you support your teams balance the desire to move quickly with the need for appropriate governance?
When we are embracing innovation with AI, it's really important to build those cross-functional teams that bring together different perspectives and areas of expertise around the technology. I think most technology, it's really important to have that multidisciplinary approach where you're bringing in different voices, but also those who understand deeply how the technology works, but also understand the domain in which it's operating. When we are developing AI or using AI, it's always within a context that it ultimately gets deployed or applied. So you need to work with the people who understand what the use case is, who the customer is, how it will work when it is actually deployed, and interacting with customers or with the team members who will be using it. So bringing together those different voices to help inform the way to govern and effectively enable the tool in a way that really is going to be sustainable. So you want to ensure you have those considerations and risks identified from a group who can bring the diversity of thinking that's necessary for a tool like AI.
Thank you. And how do you manage the complexity of potentially being seen as the group that's slowing down innovation, the ability to move quickly, and also ensure that you are deeply engaged as you need to be to ensure the responsible use of this new technology?
When you're working with businesses and technology teams in adopting AI, there's so much happening in this space. It's very dynamic, and there are incredible technological advances that are becoming available for teams to use. So moving quickly is really critical. And that means not just identifying risks, but doing so in a way that's very accelerated. So you need that diversity of voices to kind of help get to the bottom of where the concerns are very quickly, but also to come together to identify the ways to mitigate and solution and ensure that when a technology is deployed, you have the right controls in place and the path to move forward. One way we do that within our organization is through a focus around data literacy and helping team members understand both the possibility of the technology, how it works, and how they can apply it into their own way of working. In addition, we need to ensure that those team members are thinking about these things proactively. And so it's not enough to just have one team who's working on governance. It really needs to be part of the culture of the organization to really think through the potential impact of new technologies and consider the adverse consequences and the benefits that will be brought about by a new AI initiative.
Thank you. As organizations set up governance structures, committees, what are the main issues that you would suggest a governance committee needs to consider with respect to AI and what their role is within the organization?
I think there are many issues that need to be considered from an AI governance perspective, and finding the right structure for that is going to have to be very dynamic, because where the priorities go on using this technology and also mitigating the risks that it brings forward are going to constantly evolve. Ensuring that the team has a way to kind of stay connected and work with great agility as the technology is developed, deployed, interrogated, and really moving quickly in a way that these teams need to be thinking about potential consequences and harms and opportunities in a way that they can quickly collaborate and come together and really be agile. Meeting on a quarterly basis, depending on the level of the organization, may not make sense. Our cross-functional teams do like daily stand-ups where they're working on this type of work, and AI governance needs to be a part of the way they're thinking when they're working with these tools every single day. I think with AI, there are definitely important considerations that need to be brought to the forefront. And as both the technology develops very quickly, it also evolves. That ongoing monitoring and thinking about how not just to ensure that team members understand the challenges and opportunities, but how can you automate and embed that into the technology? So using AI to help control AI becomes an important part of the conversation. There are different tools and techniques that can be used to frame out what's possible and ensure that the technology is working in a way that is really obtaining the intended outcome. One important concept for responsible AI is certainly human in the loop. I think that idea of ensuring that we have a person who is understanding how the technology works, can explain what it's doing, what it's trying to do, and how it's been trained, and ensure that those outcomes are consistent with the objectives of everyone who has worked together to put that AI model in place. So having that verification and that accountability for the technology is really critical. And I think aligning on what is meant by AI. There is certainly lots of different iterations of the technology, but I think how it gets used can be very, very different depending on the organization or the institution or the researcher that's using it. Ensuring everyone understands what the technology is, having that AI literacy, but also understanding that it is a tool. I like to think of it as augmented intelligence, not just artificial intelligence, because it's something that is here to help make work easier and really extend the possibilities, but you need that human in the loop to ensure that it is achieving that expected outcome and monitoring and overseeing how it works and what it's working towards.
If we narrow in on governance committees, do you have a perspective on who should be on the committee, how it operates, who does it report to, or suggestions for organizations in that regard?
I think having a council to support governance is really critical, and ensuring that you have both members from the technology team or your AI group, as well as the businesses that are going to use the technology, and the data owners, the people who are responsible for the data that the AI is working with, need to be aware of how it is being governed and enabled. Having a governance committee can really help bring that discussion and that collaboration together. I think that when you have different leaders sharing the work they're doing on AI and the concerns and the interests that they have, you'll see a lot of synergies if you have a governance committee in place. And of course, within a governance team, there may be different aspects of privacy, data governance, of security, the legal requirements and concerns that need to be incorporated into that discussion to really ensure that risks are appropriately identified, managed, and mitigated, to ensure that everyone is aligned with what AI is being used for and how it is being controlled.
Jesslyn, as you think about this being for HR professionals, business leaders, is there anything you would just love to have the chance, you've got their ear to tell them?
I often work with my technology and AI counterparts and exploring all the possibilities of the technology. And so I think it isn't the time to shy away from that. I think we really do need to use the tools, see what they're capable of, find their shortcomings, and collaborate together to ensure that they're helpful and that they are working the way we intend for them to do so. If you haven't had a chance to check out ChatGPT or look at some of the cool AI features that can be integrated into tools we already have, it is the time to kind of learn about them, see what's possible, and learn more about AI, because it is certainly going to be a theme and a tool set that helps us all move forward. So learn, and when you're using it, use it responsibly.
Do you have any parting advice for someone wanting to learn more about AI?
Yeah, so I think for anyone who wants to learn more about how AI works, CFAR, one of Canada's leading research institutes around AI, has developed a course called Destination AI. And that is a really helpful walkthrough of what AI is, how it works, and can provide a really significant base level understanding of the technology and serve as that foundation for AI literacy. And for those who want to be part of the conversation, I think it is really helpful to bring together different voices and provide feedback on how AI should be used and what sorts of considerations should be put in place to help ensure that its use is responsible.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the insightful conversations with our guests as much as we did. In our work with organizations, we emphasize that they need to take a multi-level approach to building AI capability. One of those levels is governance. We hope you have got a sense of some of the governance issues from this podcast. And governance is one of the first things you need to address. You need it both to avoid mistakes and to avoid paralysis because people don't know where the guardrails are. In some cases, we've heard there are AI governance committees with no HR involvement. This doesn't make any sense given how many of the governance issues are people issues. So let us close this episode with two clear pieces of advice. One, make sure you have a highly competent AI governance committee set up now. Two, make sure HR is on that committee. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the HR Chat Show. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe and listen to some of the hundreds of episodes published by HR Gazette? And remember, for what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit hrgazette.com.